Animation is really a 19th century invention. Movies are also, and we look today at electronics, but everything then was gears and sprocket holes, and it was very mechanical. Things you could fix with a screwdriver. The first real animation device came out of Belgium. It was a phenakistoscope. It was a disc with slits on the side and a series of pictures running around the disc, and you spun it and you could hold it up to a mirror and you look through the slits and it looked like it was moving. And then that was converted to the zoetrope, which was a drum with slots around the side. And you put a strip of pictures in it and twirl it, and you look through the slits and you saw the pictures moving. And the flip book, that you flip pages, those are all a series of cycles that really, nobody could look at that and say this is going to be an industry someday. But it wasn't until Edison and Dixon in New Jersey developed a kinetoscope where they could run a minute of motion picture film, which is what they developed from Eastman's transparent film stock. And you could see something that was a little more continuous. It was the Lumiere brothers in France who decided to project the pictures on the wall. That's around late 1895. That's why they feel movies started around then, because to project it on the wall made it an audience thing, and that's the movies.
Animation, I think, even began before the Winsor McCays and all the early stuff. We go back to Edward Muybridge, when he was photographing animals in motion, trying to understand the business of what each frame sees when something moves.
Muybridge took individual shots of a racehorse moving in this famous sequence to prove that the racehorse actually kept 4 feet off the ground at one time. They never really knew whether it did move so fast. But with the moving images, you could stop it and tell.
I'm kind of a purist. I think that animation existed well before film. The marriage with film worked very well, of course. Film was just the kind of engine that sort of let you get the animation out.
Animation evolved from the old vaudeville lightning sketch acts. Cartoonists would get up on a stage and talk and create a drawing as they were talking, and sometimes they would do like the simple trick of turning a baby into an old man. Like, here's youth to old age, and they would just age the character one line at a time, and that would get a gasp from the audience.
The more you look at ancient stuff, it seems really dowdy and really rooted in the vaudeville and minstrel shows, and it's full of really vulgar humor and racist and things that really make you kind of uncomfortable. Anti-Semitic jokes and stuff like that. But it reminds you that animation had its origins in a really rough and tumble world where you had to get a laugh or you were out of there.
Well, probably the best known early animator is J. Stuart Blackton, and he worked for his own company, Vitagraph, and did these short films as just a kind of lark, it seems.
Blackton, who was working in 1906, came up with the idea of one crank, one frame. One crank, one frame. And he made a picture called Humorous Phases of Funny Faces, which is just drawn on a chalkboard. Again, it's the lightning sketch, but his hand isn't there. And it appears that the drawing is drawing itself because it was added one frame at a time. And that was the first time anybody had put a drawing itself on film. That film had a tremendous influence on everybody after that. Everybody was doing a modification of that idea in some way or another. Characters drawing themselves, interacting with live action, all that kind of stuff. All came from Blackton's film.
And one of the people who was a specialist in the lightning sketch act was Winsor McCay. McCay was an all-around popular entertainer, but primarily he was a cartoonist for the Hearst newspapers. And he had an arrangement that would let him go on the vaudeville stage once in a while and present lightning sketch acts.
Winsor McCay really popularized animation, was the first one to do that. He's called the father of American animation, inspired a whole generation. But he was a showman. He was a vaudeville performer before he even got into animation, vaudeville performer and a comic strip artist, so he combined those two things. As a vaudeville performer, he appeared on the bill with W.C. Fields and Harry Houdini and Will Rogers.
Winsor McCay was a master draftsman and artist, and no one, I think I can say safely, no one has ever approached what he did on a newspaper page. When you look at the original Little Nemo and Slumberland cartoons, which filled a gigantic newspaper page, his imagination as well as his skill at rendering these drawings are just mind-blowing. He was a bona fide genius. He started doing animation as a kind of experiment and a novelty. That's how he saw it. He saw it as an extension of what he was doing for newspapers, not as a career.
McKay's first film was an adaptation of his comic strip, Little Nemo in Slumberland. It was called Little Nemo. It was made in 1911. And it's quite amazing because it really takes all the detailing that was in the comic strip and brings it to the screen. And people were quite befuddled by it. They thought that what they were seeing were real people up there, real actors.
And you get this influence in McKay's animated films, which have this extraordinary emphasis, sometimes humorously, on the actual means of production. And you see workmen rolling in giant barrels of ink and enormous bales of paper. And when you compare McKay to earlier practitioners like J. Stuart Blackton or Emil Cole, Blackton and Cole would emphasize the magic. You know, how is it done? They're leaving you with all this wonderment. Whereas McKay, you know, does it on a kind of materialist basis. People are betting him that he can't make a cartoon image move. And so he takes the bet, and then you see him working in his studio, and you actually see the apparatus by which he tests the animation. It's like this giant flip book. The images are rotated on a cylinder so you can check the movement. And then he shows you one of the frozen images, "Watch me move," you know, written on it. And then it comes to life, but you know the process, you know, by which it's done. So McKay really dealt with the primacy of the artist and this heightened convention of the image.
The second film he made was called How a Mosquito Operates, and that was from 1912. To me, it's the beginning of personality animation. He has certain attitudes, the way he approaches his work, if you will. He sharpens his long proboscis on a wheel. He's full of interest in what he's doing and very fastidious. So you start to imply personality traits in this little character.
It's pretty horrifying, actually, because the mosquito is a very large mosquito, and as it draws blood out of its sleeping victim, its body swells with the blood, and it's not just like a balloon filling up with water. You have a sense in McKay's drawings that there's an actual structure to this mosquito's body, and that structure is reflected in the way it swells and enlarges as it gorges itself in blood.
That was one of the scariest films I've ever seen. And that film, because of the detail and almost the beauty of the drawing and the fineness of it, it's really my nightmare of insects. It's very beautiful, but it's very creepy.
One important film that Winsor McCay will always be known for is Gertie the Dinosaur. And Gertie has, depending on which print you look at and the projection speed, about 10 minutes of animation. Again, we don't know exactly when work began, but it probably took about 2 years to get it done.
He didn't use printed backgrounds or cells, and so he retraced all his backgrounds, which gives the films one perspective, what might be a kind of crude quality. The lines are kind of wavy and wiggly in the backgrounds a lot. But from another perspective, they're really vibrant and really alive.
In his films, he became quite adept at recycling frames. When Gertie shifts back and forth, we really feel her weight, feel gravity pulling on her. Those cards are recycled. That was one of the ways that McKay got around this labor-intensive challenge that animation presented.
This dinosaur moves variously like a large animal an animal of other kinds. It's playful like a cat, for example. And he captures this sort of movement very convincingly in this dinosaur's movements. He makes it real, makes it convincing by finding ways to suggest other animals through its movements.
Gertie doesn't really have any traditional orthogonal receding lines, but it does have receding perspective in the lines of the bank of the lake behind her. Also, some perspective when Gertie throws the woolly mammoth over her shoulder and he or she flies back and lands in the water. So he uses perspective tricks like that. This is something that will be developed by animators for the next 2 or 3 decades, and that is visualizing the scene as though it were being filmed by a camera in real time and real space.
You know, he was so concerned about having people believe in what he was drawing. He wanted, like Disney, he wanted you to believe in the characters. He wanted you to think it was a real dinosaur in a real world.
The Sinking of the Lusitania by McKay is recreation of the sinking of the Lusitania, an animated recreation, something that there were no cameras present, so it was something that was in demand, something that he had an urge to create, and something that really shocked and moved audiences to see.
It's actually a documentary, a cartoon documentary of the sinking of Lusitania, and it's very detailed and very beautiful. He used cells there, I think, for the first time, and you can tell the intricacy of all the details, and it makes it a little more of a propaganda film almost.
The somber feeling that he got into it, the almost sentient quality to this ship that is wounded and then goes down so slowly in these agonizing death throes. I mean, you feel almost a personality coming out of the boat. It's an incredible, incredible film.
When the ship is going down, we see the hapless victims falling and jumping off, and it kind of looks forward to Titanic many decades later as the ship goes down. He's trying to make a point, so he uses the sentimental shot of a mother and her child going under the water as part of the climax of the film. It's really quite a moving film even today.